with that in mind, breaking the cloud bill down to its very first principles, you've got at its simplest level, you've got usage and rate equals your bill. So the less you use, the less you pay, the less your unit cost is, the less you pay. And I know it's not quite as simple as that, but it helps my brain anyways to think about what's my wheelhouse, what am I focused on, and for the purpose of this, it'll just be that rate element that we're trying to drive. So without further ado, the two levers that sit within that. So you've got the enterprise agreement, which is every 1, 3, 5 pick year period of time. You sit down with your hyperscaler and you say, I'm going to spend this amount over this period of time. What's it worth you? What discount rate are you going to give to me? This is a very large, cumbersome process, and it typically goes all the way to the top of the organization, depending on how big your cloud bill is. But if you're in FinOps and if you're involved in this, chances are you probably have a decent level of spend. So this might be something that's on your radar. So the key thing here is to it's kind of like they say about voting, vote early and often. It's kind of engage early with the discussion. You don't want to be trying to pull together your forecasts or your projections with the commitment coming up for renewal the next month. This is where we need to engage with the procurement or sourcing folks to bring them into the tent, because they'll be the ones hammering out the finer details, but they're not living and breathing the cloud every day, so they might necessarily understand all the nuance. So doing things like regular forecasting, budgeting on a monthly, weekly, daily, whatever your cadence is basis will help when an email drops in your inbox saying, what do you think our spend is going to be over the next 5 years? At least you've got some methodology in place that you can kind of start to build on. The key with the enterprise agreement piece is when you give a number, you want it to be as accurate as possible. And what I mean by that is it's twofold. You don't want to commit, for example, to $10 million and you only end up spending 5, because what that means at the end of that term, you have to find that $5 million somewhere. So you're kind of committing to spend that amount of money over that period of time. The flip side of that is you don't want to under project your commitments. So if you have commitments, if for example you say I'm going to spend $10 million and you spend 15, well, maybe you would have got a better discount if you thought that you were going to spend 15, if you told them you were going to spend $15 million over that period of time. So it's all about trying to be, you don't need to be perfect, but it's kind of reducing the variability as much as possible in kind of arming, sourcing, and procurement to negotiate the best deals possible. So that's kind of real macro, once in a blue moon piece where it might come into effect. The other piece that's probably more applicable to FinOps practitioners is around the commitment-based discounts. This is your reserved instances, your spots, your committed use discounts, your savings plans. So this is where you're making daily, hourly, monthly micro adjustments to your commitments to maximize the savings return that you can get for your variable usage. An important point to note, and I'll just go into the beauty of FinOps in the cloud, is that everyone's a little bit different. And I suppose that's part of the reason that we all might be kept in a job for a little bit longer and the AI bots won't quite kick us out just yet. But when you think about the different cloud providers, the order that the discounts get applied vary very slightly. So when it comes to AWS, for example, your EDP discount, how they work it is you have your committed-based discount, so your RI or savings plan, you get that saving, and then the EDP or the enterprise discount program gets applied as a billing construct. So you effectively get 2 discounts from Amazon. So it's the most straightforward, and I suppose typically that's why when I look at the customers I work with, we typically see a much higher level of coverage with AWS than the others, because it's you save what you've covered and you also get the EDP. You're not kind of messing it up. Where the nuance and difficulty comes in would be more around the Azure and the GCP area, where the enterprise agreement, and the discount that you get there gets applied, or you get the RI savings plan or code. You don't get both. So it's important to know what your discount, you need to even be tighter aligned with your procurement, because I suppose when it comes to AWS, it doesn't really matter what your, it matters, but it doesn't really matter to a day-to-day FinOps practitioner's operations what the EDP percentage is, because you're not getting in each other's way. But when it comes to the other two, you need to know what's the discount rate that you're getting for that agreement by service, because the common example used is managed disk for Azure. Typically, for most decent sized customers, the MAC discount, the discount that you get at an agreement level from Azure is greater than the discount that you get if you bought an RI. So in that case, you could have gone to the effort of doing the analysis, purchasing a reservation for managed disk, and you're actually getting a lower percentage than if you did nothing. And that's why we typically see a lower level of coverage when it comes to Azure and GC. So it's an important thing to know, to be familiar with the documentation and also familiar with your agreement and how those discounts are broken down. So that's the big macro level. And then looking at the lower level, I suppose this is where people are probably more familiar with, and this is the committed based discounts. You've got, broadly speaking, you've got three categories. You've got spot instances, which at their base level are excess capacity that the hyperscalers can give you at a discounted rate. The fact that they're giving it, that you're kind of choosing these machines at a discounted rate, means there is some limitations around potential interruptions. So maybe someone actually wants that machine now, and you're just kind of borrowing it on this spot instance, you'll get notified and then you'll get kicked off. So you need to be very careful about what type of workloads you put on these spot instances. Generally, dev and test and workloads that can stand interruption. So having that understanding of the portfolio of workloads that could be candidates for this is important. You definitely don't want to put production on it. The central tier, where we see a lot of the commitments, is around the savings plans or spin-based cuts if you're GCP. The savings plans are a really powerful tool, and they're being pushed by all hyperscalers because it's a lot easier to understand. It's, for example, I commit to spend $10 an hour on compute for the next 1 or 3 years. So it's pretty simplistic. And the beauty of it is it's really flexible. So for example, when it comes to AWS, not only does it cover your EC2 compute, but it covers EKS, ECS, and Lambda as well. So, and it'll flow to all regions, all operating systems, all tenancies. So it's quite flexible in that regard. The downside, and I suppose the thing that's not in the flashing banner at the top when you log into the consoles, is that you're locked in. So if you commit to, it's kind of like an EDP or an enterprise agreement. Once you commit to a savings plan, you are committed to a savings plan. So if you've bought a $10 an hour savings plan for 3 years and your usage drops and you only need $5 an hour for the remaining year and a half, tough luck. You're paying that $10 an hour savings plan. So that's the balance that you're always trying to strike. And I suppose that's why often we see coverage for savings plans typically might be 60, 70, maybe 80%, depending on the stability of the workload. The third leg in the stool then is around the reserved instance piece, where you've got the reservations or the RIs or the CUDs. And here it's kind of another take on the commitment, whereas the savings plan is spin-based and more generic. This is where you get more specific. So you're picking a machine type in a region with a platform and a tenancy. So you are kind of losing flexibility in terms of you are picking exactly what you are covering, but you do get some flexibility then in another regard. And that's when, for example, when it comes to standard RIs, there has been some changes, but you do have the ability to sell some of those on the secondary marketplace. Convertible RIs, if you modernize infrastructure, you can make changes there. And there's a few other with Azure, you can swap RIs for savings plans. With GC, you can move projects. So there, you do have more flexibility in terms of, I suppose, getting out of the commitment than you do with the savings plan. But it is more onerous and it does take a bit more management, and you can't just set it and forget it. There's a little bit more to it. So then moving on to the last piece, I don't know, I should have had more of a track on how I'm going with time. I don't have any Oscar music playing, but I'm sure Victor kicked me off if I needed to. What are the next steps? What's kind of actionable here? First off, I suppose talk to procurement or sourcing. They don't bite, I promise. I used to work in that department. They're lovely people. By looking up your org chart and dropping someone a note, they, like, you can ask the simple question, do we have an enterprise agreement? When are they up for renewal? What's our burn rate? And that might be, when is the agreement looking to finish? How much are we purchasing every month? To, are we on track to be over or under? And how does that look? Because the earlier you engage in that discussion, the better outcomes you can get, because there is always an option to push some software renewals, for example, through the hyperscaler marketplace, and that can count towards your commit. So instead of having to cut a check for the differential, you could, like, the procurement person will still buy what they wanted to buy, but they buy it in a way that it meets another commitment that they have. So it kind of helps. It also builds that bridge when it comes to understanding, could we leverage those software renewals through the marketplace in the future? So it could help with your wider FinOps strategy. The second, the group that you could potentially engage with is the engineers. And I know there's a lot of engineers on this call, smarter people than me. I'm an accountant, and they build this stuff. And like, if I always say that, like, if production, no one's going to shout at them if something's 5 or 10% more expensive, but if production falls over, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So you don't want to send them a spreadsheet, but you do, maybe by doing some of the heavy lifting to analyze the workloads, see what could potentially be a candidate for spot instances as an example, and having done a lot of the heavy lifting with the proposal might be a worthwhile discussion. Also, you could talk about architecture, like, what silicon are you using? Is it beneficial to move from, for example, M5 to M6G? So AWS give a discount for moving to their most to their own silicon, but then that involves refactoring. Is the engineering team looking to refactor anyways, and is this something that could be a consideration? Just having those kind of high-level dialogue. Nothing has to come from it. There doesn't have to be a set agenda, but even establishing that relationship will make a big difference. The last piece then is just take action. Do something. Not something too dramatic, but just take a small action, whether it be buying a very small savings plan, just to see what it looks like. How does it appear in your billing? Can you see the utilization? Can you see the savings start to flow through? Then based on that, could you maybe look at a layered strategy, which is where you buy a little bit every month, every couple of months, every week, depending on the size of your environment or how much risk you want to take at a time. Just by doing those small little actions, you'll start to see that it grows, the savings might grow, and then you're kind of building more traction to be a bit bolder, braver, and expand your scope and your understanding. But the key thing is just to start. The last piece then is maybe trial the convertible RI or resource-based cut or a reservation in Azure. Just, again, something small, just to see, look at the usage pattern, make a decision to buy something really small and start to see some return and see if there's a use case then to build something further. And I think that's me. I think I was about on time, maybe a bit quick, but thanks for having me, Victor.
Thanks. It was great. So please give some applauses on the chat for Donal. I think it was an amazing talk. You talked about one of the probably most relevant topics in FinOps together with some of what we are going to talk today, which is the commitments. And we have a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to try and see if I have one sec, because I have about yeah, I'm going to start about to rate the talk, just for our reference and just for getting feedback. I think this one was amazing, so please feel free to do so while we address the questions for Donal. Okay, so Let me go to the questions and let me take a read with that. I have too many screens open, so it's amazing. The first one is, I see you talking about AI, but Microsoft is already pushing MCA contracts now to replace EA, and that impacts actually a lot of clients in Europe. Any recommendations on that? That's the first part of the question, and we'll continue with the other.
Yeah, I suppose Microsoft's a big beast. If it's moving in a certain way, it's kind of a case either you're on the bus or you're under it. So there's not a whole pile that can be done around that. I suppose the main thing is look at the terms of the two being offered and see is there any clauses within the EA that you look to rely on, and see if they can be transferred across to the MCA. It wouldn't be an area that I spend a lot of time in, but from the smarter procurement people that I've dealt with in the past, that's a key takeaway that they would have.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there are a lot of experts in the community, so feel free to reach out in the Slack as well about it if you have any more doubts. I have treated it a couple times in the newsletter, so there should be info on that. Continuing with the same question from Malek, is that also SP savings coming from AWS console are false. They integrate systemically EDP savings on plus of SP savings, which is not correct. So important to highlight from a FinOps perspective when calculating the wrong. So I'm not sure if you have experimented like some misalignments or when you are accounting with EDPs and SP savings in the past, Donald, that you can reflect on this.
I kind of understand where you might have difficulty with the SP recommendations. I suppose important things when you look at them is they're not just covering their EC2. So sometimes you might think, geez, that number is really high. We're not spending that on EC2, but it might be a case the fact that you've got a lot of ECS, EKS, and Lambda built in there. I don't fully understand a bit about integrating with the EDP savings piece, because that's just a kind of a billing construct that you do with the savings plan applied at this level, and then the EDP is applied when you get the invoice. So I'm not quite fully getting that second part, but it's that's something I'd like to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, so you can, Malek said it can explain later. Maybe you can chat directly in the Zoom meeting, so you can get more information. Okay, so continuing on with the following question is, you mentioned private pricing with AWS. What type of services do these generally cover?
Again, such a cop-out answer, but it depends. What I've seen before is, for example, a company I used to work with, they used a lot of Outpost for their edge computing, and that was a big area of spend. And AWS were looking to push that at the time as well, so they got more favorable discounts there. So if there is one particular service that you're using that's maybe a little bit outside of the norm, and you've got a material spend or plan to do more in that space, that's maybe an area that you could look when you're at the negotiating table to look for an enhanced rate on top of the general discount that you would get. So it's just picking your battle on that. What's the thing that'll make a difference?
I think that's a very good answer, man. Continuing with the following one, do AWS and Azure still offer RIs? I thought they were prioritizing more savings plans over reserve instances.
Yes, they are very much still there. I know Azure put the cat among the pigeons. I think it's about a year ago where they were saying that they weren't going to allow the exchange, because with Azure at the minute you can exchange your RI for your savings plan if it's going underutilized, as an example, or else you can buy something different. But there was talks previously of them doing away with that. They got massive backlash and they rolled back on that. So I don't know if that is going to come back again or not, or if they got burned so badly by the initial backlash that they're not going to touch it again. So there is that piece. So that's very much there. In terms of the AWS piece, in terms of standard RIs, they did make some changes at the start of 2024, I want to say, where I might get a bit technical here, but if there's like volume discounting applied, and it kind of puts some limitations around reselling standard RIs on the secondary marketplace. Being a little bit skeptical, that's probably because the standard RI has the best savings right there. So they want to kind of make it a little bit harder, and they offer discounts in different ways. with the EDP. So the standard RI has been restricted. Around convertible RIs, they're very much alive and kicking. The only limitation that might be coming down the pipe in the future is that some newer generation machines mightn't be coverable by the convertible RI. But like anything, it's always like the best strategy. It's like an investment portfolio. You don't want to put all your eggs in the savings plan basket. You don't want them all in RIs either. Just a balance between them all is probably the optimal.
Yeah, that's a thoughtful answer. I think that yeah, you need to balance and you need to adapt, even though there are some movement is that the savings plans and this flexible compute is getting preference over the other stuff. So continuing on with another question is, do you investigate the commitment beforehand, especially the prepaid commitments can be mystical. So what's your approach to this?
The prepaid bit is interesting. The all upfront and the partial upfront. When it comes to Azure, there's no benefit of paying for it upfront. You'll probably just make your accountants angry that you're impacting their cash flow. But when it comes to AWS, I can't be sure on GC. I'm not a whole pile sure, but I know on AWS you do get additional discount by doing a partial upfront or an all upfront. I know for an all upfront, it depends on the platform that you're using. So if it's Linux, it's an extra 5%, Windows is 3%. SQL is not worth your while because they only give you 1%. And but that prepayment piece, in terms of investigating it beforehand, the best thing to do, the tooling of the hyperscalers is quite good. You can look at the historic usage that's there, see the stability, and just buying a portion of it, and then they've got some really good visualizations around the utilization, and you can see what's happening. But I would recommend slow and steady. Don't swing for the fence straight away because you'll get burned fairly quickly, and you won't want to go back again.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so then one of the last questions, and then we'll probably move to the following talk. Then there is probably the rest of the questions you can answer them on directly on the Q&A section. So, in your opinion, is better to use one provider, or there is a suggestion to use several providers depending on the context? In this case, regarding your experience, what is your the best combination of providers? What are thoughts on multi-cloud or single cloud, or what have you experiments on your side?
Massively cop-out answer, but it depends massively
Yeah.
again, like because the workloads and the application and the use case are so very different. Also, the size of the business, like maybe one hyperscaler might be doing, they always want to take business off one another. So it's always beneficial to have a little bit of a leg in a couple of camps because you know, always say, okay, which portion of my workloads could I legitimate or microservices or aren't monolithic that might potentially move across, and that's a stick that you can use to beat one with at the time of your EDP renewal, and likewise you can do the same the other way. So just playing them off each other might be the way to go. But again, the differential there is it worth the hassle of maintaining a multi-cloud environment? Is the juice worth the squeeze is always a question there.
Yeah, I think it's probably the largest. It depends, and it really needs your business case to be analyzed.